here is our data, and what I was talking about before were our benchmarks. Remember, initially I gave the bar graphs. I initially had said this is where we started in 2000. That is the same information that's given right here. So I looked at the 30 credit hours, 45 credit hours in 4 years, degree completion in 4 years. That's the same information, but now we've got it in a line graph to see the trend line. So we can see what's happened through the years. So again, if you look at this, you can see that in 2004, which is when we initially started Achieving the Dream, this is where we were in terms of the trend line. If you follow the cohort that started once we started our strategies, our 2006 cohort, that's that second yellow circle that went up, you can still see that we're trend lining up. In the past, what we did was we used to do bars to bars. It's a bigger deal, I think, to see trend lines because you can see blips in the graph, you can see what happened one year. I can also tell you that our hurricane year was this one here. Fall 04 was our hurricane year. And then we had some more hurricanes in fall of 05. And then we were normal again. So, but if you look at those, they actually didn't have too much of an impact on our trend lines. So our Banner implementation year, that's even more important. When we put Banner into effect, that was this year. See how we had the blip? But not down here in terms of degree completion, right? This was the 02. You can see degree completion went up. So these are some of the things that you look for in your internal, and that's part of what you also need to rely on. You have an institutional past. You have people that have been here a long time that when they see this data, you can go back and piece together what might have contributed, what were the things you can't control for that you can kind of figure out what the story was that year. For our gateway courses, which were the 6 courses we talked about that we targeted all the developmental math, those were 3, college algebra, Comp 1, and US government. We decided to do a straight average because we just needed a baseline. So we just decided to do a straight average of what the success rates were, and we broke it down by ethnicity. When we started in 04, this is what we were seeing, and there was definitely a gap between how students performed. And actually, if you look at our 03 data, you can actually see even a bigger disparity than that. So you can see back in 03, we had some weird stuff going on. In 04, we saw a big gap between all of the populations again, Caucasian, then Hispanic, then African American. Remember I showed you as benchmarks before? Right? I showed you the steps, right? And it just looked like steps. Now we went ahead and trend lined them so that we could follow them throughout. If you follow it through the Achieving the Dream years, it was always trend lining up. And the year that we won the award for the Achieving the Dream strategies that showed the gaps closing, it was these 2 years that they were looking at in terms of our data. If you look at this data, yeah, we had a little bit of a trend line down. I'm back in the classroom this year. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I said that earlier too. I get a nice little laugh. Yeah, you have to remember that there could be anything that happens in order to affect your data. You don't really know what's going on. I do have some concern about what's happening with our African American population. One of our folks that's on our team, one of our data team members, fantastic person, he looked at this data and he said, "We are still doing better than when we started." He said, "We may have had a blip in 2008. Take that out of the picture and see what's." I mean, he just kind of kept looking at it and trying to encourage us not to freak out and panic attack. But we can't help it. Trend lines. See, I told you I was having feedback. Trend lines are powerful, and they explain a lot of things that we're doing, and you have got to take your data and do these, because I think it paints a picture that is important to look at. So that's what we were looking at in terms of our data across the 6 gateway courses, or the 6 courses we targeted. This one is important because this is our fall to fall retention, our fall to spring retention, and our fall to summer. Now, here's something else. This is our benchmark number 4, persistence from one term to the next. And you can see again, when we started Achieving the Dream, this is what we were experiencing. We had about a 79% fall to spring retention, which is nothing to sneeze at. That is a fantastic retention or persistence rate for your students. Our fall to fall was not great, but you know what? It's not bad either. 60% is not bad. And then you have your fall to summer. You know, you anticipate students aren't going to take summer classes. So it's important sometimes to get that data, though, because you need to have a baseline. I know that a lot of our students might not take summer classes, but you know what? We need to at least know what we're trending. The other thing that we knew that we had to take into account is folks are getting certificates higher than they have in the past as well, because they're looking to get employed. They're looking for ways to go back out into the workforce and get a job. So we knew we needed to track that too. We often love looking at the 05 blip and go, whoa. But yeah, so there you go, whoa. Look at 05. We have tried to figure out what that was. We still don't know. Somewhere in 05, a bunch of people decided they were going to get a certificate. We don't know. We don't know. That would be called an outlier, because we have no idea. Okay, so in 04, this is where we started, and you can see the Achieving the Dream years. We believe, because we're looking at all of our data, there's a lot of other factors that are out there, but we know we at least need to look at the trend line to see if anything's happening in terms of helping students be successful in college. Is anything that we're doing for Achieving the Dream? I don't know. I'd like to think so. We looked at the strategy level reports, and we've seen a big difference, so that was important to look at. The other one was graduation rates by ethnicity. Remember, this was the one that I started with by saying, as a mathematician, I never would have put this chart together. This one I would have. I think, again, looking at trend lines of where we started in terms of ethnicity is really important for us to go back and look. Particularly if you look at where African Americans were back in '97. I mean, look at that. It's always been that we have the Caucasian, and then we had the all ethnicities, because, you know, by the way, our Asian students outperform everybody else, and it's just, I think that's a national thing. But for us, if you look at that, that's why we don't have them broken out. It's only like 5% of our students are Asian in Florida, so that's why we don't have their own little category. So they're part of the other. I'm sorry, but that's true. If you look at the Hispanic students, this is kind of where they started, but you'll notice that throughout the years we have trend lined, everything tends to trend line up. Again, the guy on the data team said, well, if we just take the farthest left point and the farthest right point, I just looked at him and I said, yeah, we could find the slope. What are you trying to get at here? I just did one of these things where I'm like, well, what? But he basically was saying, look at the trend lines, they're trend lining up, and you just kind of want to look at what's happening and follow that throughout your culture. This happens to be the college-ready students, right? And if you follow them, the college-ready students hitting graduation, we still, at our very best, our Caucasian students are graduating at a 44% success rate. And at least we remember I've talked to some of you about what about the students that are leaving college because they go into university or another college? What about the students that are only here for a course or two? You can't worry about that. Your data is your data, as messy as it is. Get a baseline so you can study your trend lines and go with it. Because you know that you're always going to have those things you cannot control. No matter how much you try to, you cannot control. And you've got to at least figure out trend lining what's happening. And so trend lining, when we look at the college-ready students, we are seeing gap closing. It's just that the African Americans had a long way to go, and they're not quite there yet. I would say our interventions are helping a bunch, because we've already talked about Link and how much it helped. We already talked about SL. We already talked about student success, and how much all three of the interventions have impacted the minority groups as much as they did. But I will say that the African American males we had to do significantly more study on, because it is having a less of an impact on the African American males, and that's our data. So, and I think it's a lot of people's data. If you talk to other Achieving the Dream schools in the nation, it's nice because you've got all these databases to look at, to compare yourselves to. Here is our college prep. Remember, I already said they were doing worse. And they're still not doing as well as the college ready, but at least we're still looking at the trend lines. I want to point out this is where we were in '04 when we started. It was the data that we collected in terms of college prep and their readiness for degree seeking. If you look at our first cohort that actually were prep students that went through the sequence, you can see on this one, this is graduation rates for college prep students in 4 years. You can see that we've gone up over time. Again, it's trend lining up. So you're looking at the '04 cohort, which is just before we started the initiatives, and then we look at the fall '06 cohort through summer of '10, and that's, you've at least seen them go up in every single category, which is really kind of exciting. I'm not sure if we can accredit all of that to achieving the dream, but we can definitely say we're doing something right. There is change, and here's the other thing. Just because it's the strategies that we're talking about for achieving the dream doesn't mean that there aren't other things going on that are contributing to success. Once you start having transformation at your institution that's all about focus on the students, about success rates, it's infectious. Everybody's going to get involved. People are going the extra mile to take them to support centers. When they see a student wandering, typically somebody who used to just walk right by that student and just kind of ignore them stops and says, "What can I help you find?" It's infectious.